Where are we?
This is Mark McNeese in New York City, and you're listening to another edition of Live Mic with Mark. Welcome to the podcast. This is Mark, and my guest this week is author, journalist, multifaceted, multi-talented David Swatling. Now, David's on the line, but before I say hello, he grew up in rural New York, studied theater at Syracuse University, and pursued an acting career on both coasts before moving to Amsterdam in 1985. He produced arts and culture programs for Radio Netherlands worldwide and is a 3-time winner of the NLGJA Excellence in Journalism Award, among other international honors. Just so people listening know that NLGJA is the National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association. You wrote for Amsterdam's first gay weekly Trash in the Streets and hosted Alien, a local gay radio show. You continue to blog about arts and LGBTQ issues from Amsterdam and elsewhere. Calvin's Head, which we will talk about, is your first novel, and obviously you work from elsewhere because you're not in Amsterdam.
Not at the moment, no. Right now I'm in northern New Hampshire, the White Mountains.
You have friends there or loved ones?
Yeah, I have a close friend from college, has a little inn right next door to a summer theater, which has been running for 50 years. So it's very rural up here, very mountainous and very beautiful. But during the summer, it's a kind of a hive of activity. But in the spring and in the fall, it's a great place for me to come and write.
Oh, good. I just heard an echo. My partner Frank and I have a house in rural New Jersey, so I understand being in the countryside. We go there on the weekends. We're going there Saturday, and I love it. It's 26 wooded acres.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Very country. There's more deer than people.
Yeah, up here there are moose crossing signs.
Now, there's so much that I want to ask you about. Obviously, being an expat, I'm curious about that. You moved to Amsterdam in 1985. So I'm curious to know how and why. I mean, what brought that on?
Well, I came to New York about 1975 right from college to pursue kind of an acting career. And that wasn't going so great. I did a few things, but there was this thing that I kept getting. When you get into your early 30s, you're going to be very castable. And I didn't know what that meant, but I thought I'm not going to bang my head against the wall, so I stopped for a while. And when you stop doing the one thing that you really are passionate about, it leaves kind of a hole, and which I filled with all the wrong things in the East Village in the early 1980s. There was all this trouble you could get into, and I got into most of it. So I really felt like I had to leave. And then one night I was in a bar, and a friend raised her hand and said, "Anybody want to sublet an apartment in Amsterdam?" And in 3 weeks I was gone.
Wow.
I just quit my job, sold whatever belongings I could, or gave them away to friends, and fled. It was really more escape than move.
Now, I have a question about how that works. I worked at Reuters, and we had a lot of British expats. My boss was a Canadian expat until she found out she was actually an American citizen, which was weird. But when you live in another country, do you have to renew your? Do they have their version of a green card? How do you stay there?
Oh, yeah. Well, I didn't do anything when I first moved there. I was very naive. I didn't check out anything beforehand. I just arrived with suitcases and said, okay, what next? But very shortly after I arrived, I got involved with some little English-speaking theater companies, and there were lots of expats involved in that. And that's when I discovered, there actually is a little bit of work here that I could do and stay here for a while. And I started doing freelance work, but this was back in '85 when things were a lot less rigid in terms of those kinds of things. You didn't actually need a working permit. You could just kind of, get paid under the table. But a year later, I got a contract and to do a street theater tour, and I had to go to a lawyer to get paperwork so that I could sign the contract. And actually, the Dutch government paid for my lawyer to get me the legal status, but they were not happy that I was there for a year without getting in touch with them as they said, how would Americans like it if a Dutch person came there? I said, no, I know. I am sorry. I just was very contrite. Now it would be virtually impossible to do that.
Yeah.
The laws have gotten so strict on both continents. But back in '85, things were a little freer. And that's why there were these little English-speaking theater companies full of people who were just passing through and would stop for a while, do a couple of shows, and then move on. And it's a more naive time.
So do you travel on an American passport?
I still have the American passport. Yeah, I felt would be wise to keep that because the Americans are probably the strictest of all. So, and there was one point when I could have gotten a dual passport, dual citizenship, but those windows seem to open and close very quickly. And now it's, again, virtually impossible to get that unless you're, born in a different country to parents of a different country.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you about your journalism. I met you again at the Rainbow Book Fair. You reminded me that we had met in Boston at the NLGJA convention.
That's right. Yeah.
Where I did a panel on the over 50 audience, and I didn't realize that you 3 times had been their Journalist of the Year.
Well, I'm not sure. It wasn't called Journalist of the Year. These awards all go back to like the late '90s, early 2000s, when the category I was for the best radio production.
Oh, okay.
Reporting. Yeah, it was the Siegenthaler Award, named after Mr. Siegenthaler, John Siegenthaler, who's a big supporter of the NLGJA and free speech in general. Yeah.
Okay, that clears it up because I was going to ask you, what you covered, what you were covering to get that award. Did you write for newspapers? What did you do? So
they were all 3 of them were radio programs on a variety of subjects. The first one was an interview that I did with Edmund White and David Levitt together. They were in Amsterdam visiting together, and so I got them together in a room and it really turned into a conversation between the 2 of them. I just sort of facilitated. The second one was a historical documentary about the persecution of the homosexuals under the Nazi regime in Berlin before the war, called A Train to Sachsenhausen, which came out at about the same time as the documentary film Paragraph 175. They must have been doing the same research that I was doing at about the same time. And then the third one was it was called Love, Exile on the Road, which was about a little organization, or the woman that started a small organization in Holland for same-sex marriage. She called it Love Exiles because she felt she was an American in exile living in Amsterdam because her partner, who was Australian Dutch, could not be with her in the United States. And she took a bus with other same-sex marriage activists from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. And I gave her some recording equipment, and she just recorded as much as she could on the journey. And then together we made this program about that particular journey back in 2005, I think it was.
What was her name?
Martha McDivitt Pugh.
Oh, okay, because I was friends with a woman named Judy Rickard and her now wife, and they were very involved in immigration issues for same-sex couples. And she used to refer to herself as a love exile, because they would have to leave the country all the time because her mate was not American. And it was now, and they were actually one of the first couples she was one of the first people to get a green card. A couple years ago when DOMA was overturned, basically. So now, why did you decide to stop doing radio, or is that just part of life's processes?
Well, yeah, it's mostly part of life's processes because little by little funding at Radio Netherlands and other international radio groups was being cut basically because of the internet and because of things like podcasting. It turns out, and I was saying this at a very early time at Radio Netherlands, that they really needed to think about the internet and this strange little thing, as one of my older colleagues said, this little fad called podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
And what those radio stations didn't realize soon enough is that radio was becoming audio. That you didn't need the little shortwave receiver to exchange information throughout the world. That little by little that was shifting. Anyway, they started cutting the documentary work that I was doing because that was very cost and labor intensive. Then they decided to cut arts and culture coverage because that was the least interest to the audience, but that was my main focus. And by the end, I said, what do you want me to do? I'm a full producer, and now you've got me writing, little short articles for the web based on other people's work. And they said, well, why don't you early retire?
I would love to be asked that question and made
like
that offer.
Good deal at the time, but it took a year of negotiations between battling lawyers to come to terms with what that actually meant in a country as careful about. It's very difficult to get fired in Holland once you have a job. It's very there. You pay high taxes, but the rewards at the end are very good. And anyway, finally we came to terms, and I got a nice little package, and we left, even if not on the friendliest of. I mean, I had done nothing wrong at my time there, but lawyers, that's not the way that they handle those kinds of situations. So, but it worked out well for me. The whole radio station ended up closing a couple of years later, so I just sort of was on the edge before that happened, which was great because I had been wanting to pursue other things as the creative work that I was doing there had started to disappear. But I took a year off to travel, and then I was at the Brooklyn Book Festival in the fall of 2011, listening to all kinds of great people like David Rakoff and Edmund White was there. And I was really inspired. And I thought, you've been talking about writing for a long time. Now you've got time. Go home, sit down, and write. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did.
Well, that's what I want to talk to you about now. I went to the Brooklyn Book Festival last year, not this year. Mm-hmm. Last year. It was really impressive. Oh, it's very amazing. Large. It's huge.
It's huge. There's several events going on in every hour in lots of different venues. It's all free, and you just get to hear great authors talk. Last year, the poet Mark Doty was doing something with a illustrator. There's always. I met a Dutch author there who had been translated for the first time, whose short story I had produced in a translation a few years ago. It's just a fantastic place for writers and readers and people who love books to go and immerse yourselves in a full day of events. And it just totally inspired me.
Well, once you were inspired, let's talk about Calvin's Head, which is a Lambda Literary Award finalist for gay mystery.
Thank you very much.
I'd like it if you could if you could describe the book for folks. But then I also want to know about what the process was, because you were telling me that it sat in a drawer and so forth, and you went back to it. So I'm very curious to hear how it ended up where it is.
Well, I think I can combine those two things a little bit. Back in 1995, the summer of 1995, I found myself homeless, living in my Jeep with my dog. The circumstances were too boring to go into, but a very odd thing happened that summer. We're walking through Vondel Park one morning, right next to the Rose Gardens, which is an infamous gay cruising area in the middle of Amsterdam. And there was a crowd around this pond, and there were police tape, and police were diving in the pond, and police were talking to people in the crowd. And I said to somebody, what happened? And they said, oh, somebody's dog pulled a garbage bag out of the pond, and in the garbage bag was a human head. My first thought was, thank God, not my dog. My dog was a big white golden retriever who loved pulling things out of the water, and I thought, oh, could have been Calvin. Anyway, this idea kind of never left me because it was such a strong image. And a couple of years later, I was in a writing group, and I wrote the first couple of chapters of what would become Calvin's Head, starting with this homeless guy in the park with his dog and the discovery of a body. But of course, I shifted the events quite a bit because he recognizes the victim as someone he once went home with, and instead of telling the police what he knows, he moves into the victim's house. And that's where the story begins, really, and starts getting crazy after that. Because, of course, if you move into the house of a murder victim, there's a pretty good chance you're going to run into a killer. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and I, like I said, I started this back in like 98 or something. But in my imagination, as I was thinking about the story one afternoon, I saw this scene that was kind of so shocking to me that I thought, no one will believe this. This can't possibly happen. I can't write this. And that's when I just kind of put it in a drawer for 13 years. And I didn't really forget about it, but I made no further attempts to write it. And then back in 2011, when I decided to write something, this was the story that had been in my head for so long that I thought, okay, it's time to sit down and figure out exactly how this happened and what happened, and get this story out of my head so I can write another one. Now this story is sort of took on a life of its own, as it were.
I just had to spray my cat because she was on the people now realize that you and I are looking at each other. We can see each other. But yes, my cat was up there and I heard her scratching at a bag up there. Now, so you finished it, and then what did you do with it? Did you immediately send it to Bold Strokes, or?
No, first I left it alone for 3 months, and then I read it and I thought, oh, well, this has actually some possibilities. So I decided to apply for this Lambda Literary Emerging Writers thing that they do in California every summer. And I didn't get accepted, which I think the fiction mentor was Dorothy Allison, who's a fabulous writer who I'd interviewed once in Amsterdam. I love her. But, this work was clearly genre work. And now they actually have sessions with genre mentors, like mystery writers or romance writers. But it was fine. I decided I had a plan B in case I didn't get in, and that was to go to Thriller Fest in New York City, which is a yearly festival, weekend-long festival of mystery, thriller, suspense writers, sponsored by the International Thriller Writers Association. And that 4 days with my little first draft under my arm taught me a great deal about what I still didn't know and what I still needed to learn about both writing, the craft of writing, but also the business of writing. At that point, I wasn't on Twitter. I didn't have a website. I didn't know who I should send this to or how or why. One of the things they had was Agent Fest, which is like speed dating with agents. You walk around from table to table and you get like 2 minutes to pitch your idea, your story to agents. I did that. I had like 10 agents say, "Oh, that sounds great. Send me the material." And I did. And then after the thing was over and I started, rewriting, seriously doing some serious rewrites on the book, I got these series of what I called rave rejections. "Oh, I really like your writing. You're a very good writer. It's a very interesting story, but it not quite the right fit for us. We don't quite know how to market this. It's not really what we're looking for." And I began to think, they all say they like it, but nobody wants it. Is there something they're not saying? And I remember this one agent, she's the only one that mentioned this, who looked at me after I had talked about the book a little bit and said, "Wait a minute. Are all the characters gay in this book?" Or she said, are the main characters gay in this book? I said, all the characters are gay, except for the dog. I was kind of making a joke, but she didn't really smile. She just gave me this kind of whimsical look. She said, "Okay, well, send it." And I thought, nobody, not a single one of the agents in terms of, their lovely little rejection letters mentioned the aspect of the characters being gay. And I thought, I think maybe there's something that they're not saying in terms of marketability. And I so I thought, okay, I'm going to look in other directions, and I found Bold Strokes Books was willing to accept submissions from authors without agents,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd also noticed that they had re-released a series of books by John Morgan Wilson, his Benjamin Justice series of gay mysteries that had won Lambda Literary Awards and Edgar Awards and all kinds of things in the late 90s. I read them then when the story was developing, and I thought, if they like his stories, they might like this one. And so I sent it to them, and 2 months later, I had a contract for them to publish. So, in a sense, the Thriller Fest route brought me back to the gay mystery route that I had sort of looked at in the first place.
Well, I wrote down Thriller Fest because I've never heard about it, and I want to look into it.
Oh, it's a great thing. It's every July in New York City for 4 days. They have parts, the 2 days specializing in craft workshops, and then 2 days that are more specialized in authors talking about their books and different subjects related to that. But yeah, it's a fun event. I'll be part of the debut authors breakfast this year.
Oh, nice. Now, what are you writing a second book?
Yeah, well, I wrote Calvin's Head all by itself, standalone. That's the story, and that's it. Almost the first couple of readers who were really close friends, who are also writers, said to me, "Oh, where are they going to go next?" I said, "What do you mean, where are they going to go next?" They said, "Well, you could write another story with them." Well, that had never really occurred to me before. So I began to think about it, and actually where they're going to go next is, well, believe it or not, they're going to go to a little inn in the White Mountains of northern New Hampshire, an inn that dates back to the Civil War period of time and happens to be haunted. So I'm going to use the same main character and his dog, but we're going to shift genres and go from kind of serial killer thriller to a ghost story.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
Now, I always ask other writers a little bit about your routine. Do you, well, from what we've said, you don't get up and write at the same time every day. Do you outline? Do you have a routine?
My sister asked me that when I started writing the second book, which actually I started last year now, and she said, well, I said I was having a little trouble, and she said, well, what's your routine? I said, well, I don't have a routine. I just wrote one book. That one book I wrote in 1 month during the National Novel Writing Month, the NaNoWriMo that a lot of people do on the internet. So I wrote I wrote the first draft in a month after a 13-year break of having written 2 chapters. I don't outline things out. I let it go. I mean, I've been thinking about things in my head, and the certain parts of the story develop, but I mostly just write as I go, and then see what needs to be fixed afterwards. I mean, that's actually causing me a little bit more difficulty this time around than it was the first time around. I don't know why, but
well, it's easy. I can imagine it's and also you mentioned NaNoWriMo, and a lot of people seem to do that. And there's another Lambda finalist, Vinton Rafe McCabe, who's he's not mystery. He's in I think it's a debut novel, but he did the same thing. He wrote his book as part of the NaNoWriMo experience. So he wrote it in a month. And then I've talked to another author who writes. He said he writes a first draft in about 6 weeks. I'm like, wow, holy shit. I'm just a lot slower because of my day job. We talked earlier. I've only got about an hour and a half a day that I can focus on writing, but my outlining, I don't want to go too tangential here. If I used to write plays, and I would never try to write a play without an outline, because it's like building a ship. That's why it's called playwright. But with the books, I've discovered that I know my ending, and then what I will do is maybe I'll outline 3 or 4 chapters, rough outlines, not terribly detailed, because I need to get into the writing part of it. If I tried to sit there and outline 30 chapters, I just would lose interest. I would be like, I don't want to do this. So I will write a little bit because I want to get into that, the magical aspect of writing, and that often tells me where I need to go.
Well, that's what I find. I find that the beginning of a new chapter is always really tricky. And if I start right, then I'm off. But I can actually stop and have a good deal of time in between before I figure out how is the next chapter going to begin? Because I always think that those first lines, that's where a lot of writers, they think, well, just write anything just to keep going, just to keep moving forward. Well, I can't quite get to that part. I do understand the necessary element of moving forward, because if you're not writing, the story is not happening. Mm-hmm. But I do remember when I was writing Calvin's Head, I'd finished a scene, and I wasn't sure what I was going to write next. And so I took a little break, and I was reading a review of a brand new biography about Vincent van Gogh. And the review was in the New York Times, and it had his painting, blackbirds in a wheat field with blackbirds. And I thought, oh, I know. I'm going to begin the next scene with that painting, because my main character, the protagonist, was an art history student. That's why he originally came to Amsterdam. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to begin the next chapter with that painting. And so I sat down and I started writing, and suddenly I wrote Murder of Crows. That's what they should have called it, A Murder of Crows. And I realized it's not the protagonist that's looking at the painting, it's the villain who's looking at the painting. What's the villain doing in the museum looking at this painting? And it was just really clear that what I was writing was his point of view, not the protagonist's point of view. And I had to figure out how he got there, and what suddenly the whole story shifted at that moment, because even though what I had started with was a picture that I thought was being seen by one character, it turned out it was being seen by another character. I like those moments when basically the characters take over and tell you what you need to be writing next.
Yes, I do. I like that too. And I really like to let them write the book. Just I'll type it for you, dictate it.
More, yeah.
Now you're going to be at the Lammys in June 1st?
That's right. I'll definitely be there June 1st. I'm heading down to New York City next week for the Book Expo America first, and then the Lammys right after it. Yep.
Now that Book Expo is a huge thing, but the woman who writes the book reviews that are on my website, LGBT Senior, I think that's the same one you're talking about, because she lives in Wisconsin, and she's coming to New York for this big thing at the Javits Center.
I've never been there before, and it's a little intimidating. I'm going there through Mystery Writers of America have a table, and I joined their organization, so I'm going to be signing books there on Friday the 29th, I think it is. But apparently, I didn't realize it. This is really this is a big industry event, the biggest one in the States, I think, for librarians, booksellers, reviewers, bloggers. All of those people come and get copies of books that are coming out in the coming months, and yeah, there's a lot of big names represented there, and it's a huge thing. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm a little intimidated by big events like that. I don't know, this is all new to me, but I've had enough experience. I signed books with Mystery Writers of America at the Brooklyn Book Fair last fall. Didn't actually sell many books, but I was there and I was talking to people, and you sort of start to learn how to deal with these kind of events, and so the more you can go to, I think the better.
Do you do readings?
At some I've done readings, not in Brooklyn. It was outdoors. We were just in the booth. At this one, I'm not part of I don't know if Mystery Writers is sponsoring a panel that's doing readings. I don't know how those things work, but that's part of the thing about just going for the first time. You just sort of get an idea of how things work. It turns out every place I go, like when I went to the Rainbow Book Fair, not only had I met you before, but there were loads of writers there that I'd met before, and through them I met other people and some of the organizers, and now it's like, next year I'll know more about how those things happen, and that's basically my whole idea for this summer, is to do as many different events in as many different places as possible, and start to learn that particular side of being an author as opposed to being a writer. That's the one thing that I think that's getting in my way of writing at the moment, is being an author. authors have to do all kinds of things that writers really don't like to have to do.
Well, there's yeah, and I'll wrap it up, but there's absolutely a business to it, a business side to the whole thing. You know, and it's also probably a little different for those who self-publish or have their own imprints, and some of us do. David Lennon, David Lennon and Marshall Thornton, they have their own imprints, but because you have to be a businessman too.
Yeah,
you know.
No, but it's important. I mean, because you want to reach readers, and I mean, I had a following when I was doing radio internationally, but that was years ago, and you know, there's a complete that's like a past life. Now this is a whole new thing. I'm a debut author at the age of 60 something, but I've got to sort of start all over again and make contacts, and if I want my name out there and want people to read the stories I write, which I think is what any writer wants,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you have to do what you can do. I feel really, really honored to be, you know, part of the Lambda Literary Foundation's finalists in this category, because I've been following books in this category for years and years and years. Some of my favorite mysteries, gay or otherwise, you know, have won this award. Just being in that list is like a big deal that helps me as a debut author to, you know, get the next story going and get my stories out there, I hope.
Well, I'll see you there, and I know that I know David Lennon's going to be there, and I don't know if Marshall Thornton, probably, but anyways, I'll be able to see some of the people on that Facebook group that we're on.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is very nice. Do you have a speech in case you win?
I definitely will have a speech, because I once won an award without one prepared, and I will never, ever do that again. I don't care if I have it prepared for no reason, but I will not go up on stage without some thought into what I might say, because, oh, you can sound like such an idiot.
Well, I will do the same, because I'm up for this anthology that I co-edited and published.
Yes,
and I just assume I'm not going to win. I didn't even, you know, the only reason it was entered is because of my co-editor. He entered it. I would not have even, I have not entered the Lambda Literary Awards because this part of me says, you're not going to win anything. Why are you doing this? But it happened, and so I will make a list of people to thank, especially him, and I'll probably just flip out if my name gets called.
Yeah, I know. Well, believe it or not, I mean, like I said, it was the first NLGJA award that I won back in 1998 or something, and I went up on, when I heard my name, I went up on stage, and just that going up on stage, the adrenaline started pumping, and my heart was beating, and I into a microphone, and I could see this sea of fellow journalists, peers out there thinking, this guy won for radio. So but see, I think it's just great to be nominated. I mean, it's wonderful to, you know, it's always great to win something, but just being a part of a group of people that who you respect and admire is really fantastic. So I'm really happy, and happy for you as well.
Thank you, and I'm glad that we got to do this. You're very easy to talk to. You're a great guest.
Oh, thanks.
And I'm looking forward to seeing you at Cooper Union on the 1st.
Yeah, and well, who knows? We might be raising. We'll be raising glasses one way or the other, whether we're raising awards or not.
Yes. So I'll see you there, and I'll put this out on Friday and send you the link to the podcast.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mark.
Yep. Have a good night.
Bye.